thanks for having me. Let's do it again sometime.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate it. And Matt and I, we're going to stick around for a bit. We have some announcements and reminders. Dr. Dino, you go get some well-deserved rest and sleep. God bless you. We'll see you later this week.
All right. Thank you, brother.
All right. There we go. Hour and 15 minutes really does fly by. And that was fast paced. I mean, most of that was off the cuff. You and I, Matt, we've been engaging these guys forever now. Kent, obviously, forever. We've done so many debates. So we know all their arguments, at the top of our head. And, it's fun bringing them forth and just having some fun with, Dr. Dino here addressing the evolutionist favorite arguments. I mean, we touched on in the last hour and 15 minutes vestigial organs, including the whale pelvis, walking whales. Which unfortunately some creationist camps actually look to the so-called vestigial pelvis as evidence that there was like a walking whale archetype on the ark. I mean, to me, that's a little bizarre. We understand that these structures are there and connected to some important muscles for functional purposes. So no need to invoke walking whales on the ark. Anyway, that's just a rabbit trail. We touched on ERVs. We touched on Illus sequences. We touched on nested hierarchies, homology, nested hierarchies, even in these highly conserved proteins and DNA elements like cytochrome C, so the age of the earth, we touched on a ton. So if you're just getting here in the chat, please make sure that you are flipping back at some point and watching the whole show. So me and Matt do want to announce, I've got the endogenous retrovirus handbook right here, dismantling the best evidence for evolution, guys. So this is the final version. This is more so the proof copy, just for me to make sure that everything is good. So it is 171 pages. And I recommend it for everybody. 171 pages, the most comprehensive and up-to-date and technical, but also written for the layperson to understand as well, a response to endogenous retroviruses. So I find it fascinating, Matt, brother. I'm curious your thoughts. What turns out after examining the so-called best evidence for common descent, ERVs, it turns out that ERV sequences are actually some of the best evidence and confirmation for critical thinking. Have you noticed that as well, Matt?
Yeah, well, it was like digging into genetic similarity, right? Genetic similarity has been used by evolutionists for quite some time as the absolute best unequivocal evidence for evolution. Then when you realize that in 1965 it was actually predicted by evolutionists that there would be no genetic similarity because evolution would have erased genetic similarity over deep time. So what we see is how come all of these different regions have so much similarity, and how could they if mutation rates are so fast? They can't have one and without the other, right? So you can't have ERVs that have all these similarities and have beneficial functions, and then at the same time claim that, oh, well, their mutation rate's fast, but they've existed in us for millions of years. You can't have both. It's just not the way it works. So they never predicted beneficial functions. They were part of junk DNA, which were considered 99.9% worthless. Yet what do we see? All the harmful things that come from ERVs come from the mutation in the ERVs, not the virus itself. So
great point. And here's the thing. A lot of evolutionists, they're out of date on the technical literature. So you'll find in this book pages and pages and pages worth of references to the scientific literature, the primary source data, refuting ERVs and showing function after function. I've got papers from 2022 in here. I've also got a comprehensive section on Illus sequences. I answer exactly why there are nested hierarchies in the so-called mutations within the ERV elements. I address this idea of fixed versus unfixed endogenous retroviral sequences. So again, guys, and I did just look, we've also got a full color version. So it says updates in review, our final, the final updates after proofreading it. And My guess is it'll be available, both versions, probably in the next several hours. So anybody in the chat, please check the description box of this video sometime in the next 8 hours. When the book is available, I will put it in the description box, guys, because I highly encourage you to click the link. It's very affordable because we do want just as many people as possible to get a hold of this book, because it's a huge game changer. It absolutely dismantles common descent. And it confirms biblical creation. It shows that from the biblical creation starting point, we can much better explain the existence of endogenous retroviral-like sequences. So also stay tuned. I'll leave a community post as well the second that it's updated, because I do want to make sure everybody gets the fully updated version. So while we were over the last week proofreading and making sure the book is good to go for this week, I guess a couple people must have stumbled upon it before it was fully good to go. So anybody who has ordered a copy before, let's say today, you're not going to have the final version. You're going to have the author copy that we utilize to make sure everything's good to go, covers lined up. So I don't know if you're in the chat, whoever it is, shoot me an email and I'll send you a free PDF or ebook, so you have the most up-to-date version. Especially if you're a critic who wants to address the arguments in this book, we want to make sure that you have the full book. So Matt, over to you, brother. I've noticed you've got some slides too, and anything you want to kind of touch on in the next few minutes?
Sure. We'll go down the list, because when I started seeing questions and comments coming in, I stopped the chat from going. So the first one: don't get tattoos. I can attest to that. And not because you're probably going to change your mind. It's also because they slowly toxify the system by dropping heavy metals into the system. That's why after you get a tattoo that's fresh, your body usually breaks out. That's from them dumping the toxic chemicals into the lymphatic system and trying to get out of your system. That's why you break out in acne and things. So yeah, they're not the best. Another one is standing for truth. I really wish you guys would contact Alex Jones. He's right about so many things, but thinks evolution is real.
Well, could you imagine we have Alex Jones on and then the next day whole channel shut down?
Shut down for the first thing he says.
That's it. Ministry done. Oh, that's funny. Well, I was gonna say, you and I both have tattoos, but these are from my pre-Christian days. So I haven't gotten any more tattoos since. I've understood, probably not a good reason. Also because of the health reasons, as you just pointed out, Matt. Very interesting, brother. People think like we are young Earth creationists can't think outside of the box, can't even fathom evolution. It's like, man, I've watched every series of Ancient Aliens. We believed in evolution. We weren't raised this way. We're as open-minded as you can get. It's just crazy. But I saw that comment regarding radiometric dating, asking why we don't use it. Actually, Matt, because that's such an important topic. Let me address this real quick, and then then you go off on radiometric dating. I love it. So Stephen Tibet's, amen. There's a difference between tribulation, what the world does to us, and or what Satan does to us, and wrath. Right, we are not appointed unto wrath. That's a lot of times what pre-tribulation advocates would point to. And eschatology, let's be real, it should be a non-divisive issue, right? It's not like a fellowship-breaking issue. Although I think it's pretty clear that the Bible teaches a post-tribulation rapture, because it says after the tribulation. But Mark 13, Matthew 24, Luke 21, all correlate on what? Jesus coming in the clouds to gather together his elect after the tribulation of those days, when the sun is darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven. Well, what's amazing, guys, here's irrefutable proof for a post-tribulation rapture is we oftentimes talk about testable predictions here. Isn't that right, Matt? We love the science. So Revelation 6, okay, everything before it, we see the seals, the tribulation period where the Antichrist is conquering. And we should make a prediction, because in Revelation 6, what do we see? The sun and moon being darkened. Isn't that right, Matt? So we should predict, okay, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13 talks about after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, and then shall we see the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven to gather together his elect. And I'm just going to the top of my head there, so I might not have quoted it perfectly. And so we should predict, okay, Revelation 6, the sun and moon are being darkened. We should predict right after this in Revelation 7, there should be some kind of rapture event. And I challenge anybody in the chat, go to your Bible, open up Revelation 7. And this is exactly where we read Revelation 7, a great multitude that no man can what? No man could number, from all tongues and all nations. Now, the Bible has numbered some big numbers. Isn't that right, Matt? But this is a number that no man can number, which obviously must be referring to the rapture event, the catching up of all believers throughout all time. Okay, this could be a number that no man could number. And it's funny because the exact question is asked, from where did these people come from that are just standing there suddenly? They just appeared suddenly. Great multitude. And the question is answered. These are them which came out of great tribulation. I mean, can it be any more clear? Sun and moon are darkened, Revelation 6. Correlates perfectly with Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. Revelation 7, fulfilled prediction. Great multitude appear in heaven. Where'd they come from? Great tribulation. There we go. End of the story. So, the point is we want people to be prepared. We're heading, I'm sure, towards some tough times. And so Stephen nailed it. Yeah, wrath is I'm not sure if I'd agree with the Jews part, but wrath is for the unbelievers. The day of his wrath is come. The day of his wrath is come. We see that after the tribulation. Okay. And that wrath is for the unbelievers, the unsaved who are left behind. Okay, whether Jew, Gentile, anybody who's unsaved is going to be under God's wrath. So, that was kind of fun, but I just kind of wanted to go on a rant there, since Matt, you asked a great question to Kent during the show about the great falling away. So over to you, brother. Unless you want to add anything, and then I know you're going to chat about radiometric dating.
Yeah, I'm glad I threw that question at him now. And Kent made a point a while back. He said one time, he goes, I could be wrong about the rapture. He goes, but here's the thing. If you're not ready, what then? What if the rapture is after? And in these 3.5 years come, and there are horrible times and tribulations, and you're not ready because you were expecting to be raptured away first. He goes, all the better if it comes first, but what if it doesn't? So it's just like living in today's world, right? We don't know. There's a depression right around the corner. Food prices might skyrocket. Economies may crash, and things can get really bad. So what do? We get ready for it. We anticipate the problems. We buy things first. We stock up. That's the same thing with the rapture. We anticipate, okay, things might be bad. We have to go through it. So be it. Let's be ready. That's all.
Amen, brother. Amen. So did you want to address the radiometric dating question? I wonder if I can find it on screen.
Sure. Yeah, I can scroll up a little. I'll look as well. But yeah, radiometric dating, as far as accuracy goes, I have no problem with its accuracy. And it's like saying, I found a watch on the ground and it tells absolutely perfect time. Is the watch wrong? No. It works absolutely fine, but picking up that watch doesn't tell you when it was made. You can't reverse the time and know exactly when that watch was made. So the same thing applies to the radioactive elements and their decay. We have assumed from the beginning of radioactive decay that it all started out from the beginning during the Big Bang with uranium decaying into all of the different minerals from the radioactive process, right? From uranium, thorium, all the way back down to potassium, and then we finally get to iron. Well, what happens is we now have evidence from that Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine when they were trying to make these radioactive elements for energy sources, that what happens is when they form them from super heavy elements, they rapidly decay before they stabilize into the exact same proportions that we have on Earth today. And even when they're tested, they test like they are today, millions or billions of years old, depending on the element tested, of course, uranium being the oldest, that they were billions of years old, even though they were made days prior. So we can't use it as an estimate for how old something is, but we can definitely use radioactive decay for using it as a good clock after they've cooled down and they've met and they've fallen into their half-life. Once that half-life decay rate kicks in, it's very accurate. So it's good to use for a clock, but we can't use it to go back and assume that, just remove the assumptions. Now that we know that those assumptions are invalid anyway, there's no reason that we have to assume that the time that they give us going back to their origin is true, because when they form, they date old instantly. So that's why radioactive decay is good, but it's not. We've had this assumption from the very start that, oh wow, Earth must have been formed through this radioactive process, and then we looked at Earth and it had way too much iron for the process of uranium to get to iron. So they said, okay, something else must have occurred. And then they said, well, maybe it was bombarded by meteors, and that's why there's so much iron here, and that's why there's so much iron on Earth, because maybe the decay didn't have to happen all at once. And then we looked in the geologic record and didn't find many meteor impacts. So they said, okay, well, there's something else going on, and maybe the core isn't iron. Maybe we've assumed wrong. But it really just doesn't matter at this point, because we've observed it. Unfortunately, the Proton 21 laboratory was in Ukraine, and Ukraine is not doing good. So there goes any scientific further research from Ukraine for quite some time, I would imagine. And that was it on that one.
That's good, brother. That's good. It's one of those shooting themselves in the foot arguments. I mean, Matt, over the last few years, how many times have we addressed their very best rebuttals to the fact that we find C14, which should have completely decayed away in max 1 million years? We'll give them 1 million years. It should actually a lot shorter than that, but let's say for sake of argument, 1 million years. And yet we find significant levels of C14 in every single layer for the most part of the so-called geological column.
And in
where
diamonds,
it should not exist.
And in diamonds, zircon crystal, we find it in things that should not be there. They can claim contamination, because we both know they've done that multiple times. We have videos on that. But to say that it somehow got into encapsulated, impossible to penetrate zircon crystal that dates billions of years old, come on, there's no way.
Well, Matt, their main argument, and Dr. Hugh Ross used this one against Dr. Jason Lyell, that nuclear material, other sources of nuclear material down where diamonds are, because diamonds form deep within the earth, right? So they should be the most resistant to contamination. And C14 essentially forms due to cosmic ray bombardment in the atmosphere. So if you have diamonds that are deep within the earth, they're shielded from C14 in the atmosphere, basically. And so the more militant or adamant old earthers, deep time proponents, they'll say that there should be other sources of nuclear material down where the diamonds are that can recharge the C14, right? And what's funny is numerous PhD scientists have looked into this, Matt, and they estimated that you would need more than 13,000 times. Okay, let me make that clear to the audience. 13,000 times more nuclear material in the nearby rocks in order to adequately recharge the C14. And so what this boils down to is a rescue device, okay? Because you would need far too much material to recharge. And I'm talking about unrealistic amounts deep down in the earth where cosmic rays cannot reach these diamonds and other samples as well. So the point is, just this one line of argument, guys, refutes deep time, refutes the deep time assumptions. They don't have a good response, and their responses, that being their best one, has been analyzed and it's been systematically demolished. That's it. They got nowhere to go. If there's another contamination's been dealt with. Okay, so that's not looking good for deep time. Helium in zircon crystals. I mean, helium's an incredibly slippery molecule. What's it still doing in these zircon crystals? Matt, over to you, brother.
No, you nailed it. I just saw a comment pop up that said, "Where can I buy your book?" I didn't put the link yet in the comment section, but I put it in private chat for you to link so everyone can see it.
Yeah,
And,
let me say
yeah.
this. So I'm gonna share screen. So we have put in our final updates. Okay. So here's the book, Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. I've got it in front of me. The final updated version, the good to go version, I am, and Matt, I think you can see in the KDP. It looks like the updates should be done and the book should be ready for sale in, I would say, in the next several hours. So guys, please check into this video later too. And I'll put it in the description box, the link to it on Amazon for people to buy. And I'll also make a community post. We're also working on a trailer. So I want to give the links when I know all updates are complete, guys, because this is really a full dismantling of endogenous retroviruses. But not only that, also common descent in general. Okay, and it's confirmation of the biblical creation model of ancestry. Here's the colored version that we actually just put in to be published, and it looks like that's probably going to be available too, Matt, around the same time, which is pretty cool. Matt, I'd like to, especially because we got a nice audience here, and I would recommend there was a video I did recently dealing with this objection in great detail. But because we have a nice audience here right now, and it is a commonly repeated argument, Matt, what are your thoughts on this whole criticism or objection to young earth creation and a biblical model of ancestry that says crossover rates or recombination rates today are far too slow for young earth creationists to account for, because we know there is higher levels of genetic diversity in Africans versus non-Africans. And so Africans, for one, they'll say, are older than non-Africans. And humans in general, both Africans and non-Africans, go well back further than 6,000 years. And one of their arguments is recombination rates. What are your thoughts on that, brother?
Well, we're looking at recombination rates in people today, for one. And the reason that can be a general mistake is because when we're looking at people today, there's a couple things that we see. Different people have different rates of recombination. So if recombination is what's causing genetic diversity, well, what would we expect in our model? Well, if different people groups are all the same age, right? We're all different people, but Africans were not first. Why do Africans appear older? Well, they appear older because they have more PRDM9, which means more sites for hotspots and recombination to occur. So therefore, they have more mutations, making them look genetically older, but they're not. Another thing to take into account is that human beings in our model, from what we've seen, live longer. The longer you live, the more recombination events you're going to have. Also, going into the past, we see that people also had larger genomes. When you have more genomes, you have more areas for hotspots and recombination to occur, therefore making recombination events even faster. So yes, we can account for it, just like we can account for it in mutation rates that we observe as well, but it's much easier to answer it when we take these other factors in.
Great points. And what's amazing is this is all, once again, supported by the primary source data. You know, I've got a whole section on this as well in the Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook that, again, I highly recommend everybody in the chat pick up a copy. Okay, I am going to have the links ready tonight sometime, the second all the updates are in. And I want everybody to have, of course, the most completed version. But we refute these talking points, the best so-called arguments the evolutionists have, directly from the primary source data. As Matt was pointing out, I mean, this PRDM9 DNA element, okay, it is a driver of the genetic map. And Matt, what does this say? Most, if not what, all meiotic recombination rates or events are controlled by PRDM9. And I've got a number of papers that show how Africans have more of these sites. They have more recombination hotspots. Okay, these PRDM9 DNA elements, they look for certain letters, these hotspots, they latch onto it and then they recombine. Okay, and Africans have more of these, which means they have more pieces of DNA. And there is just technical paper after technical paper after technical paper. Isn't that right, Matt? That shows how recombination rates vary even within the genome and in different populations. Now, Matt, if mutations over time are destroying genetic functionality, are degenerating the genome and its many various classes of functional and beneficial DNA elements, including the PRDM9 DNA element, what happens over time as these PRDM9 sites are eroded and destroyed?
More mutations, more harmful, more sickness, more disease. What do we see in the world today? Exactly that.
Right.
So when people go, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and if they're eroding, as you're pointing out, if they're eroding the genome, leading to more disease and degeneration overall, but they're also eroding these DNA elements, the PRDM9 sites.
Right.
That means less recombination over time, which means logically in the past, what do we have? More recombination,
so
more diversity. Okay. Africans have more pieces of DNA, not because of age, but because of what, Matt? Recombination.
Recombination.
Paper after paper.
And look at this. They even admit this in their own work. It is thought that we split from a common ancestor 5-6 million years ago, more than enough time for substantial genetic differences to develop. But yet, in their own model, we don't have those. We should, but they're not there. Notice that? They even admit it. They go, there should be more differences. But there's not, so something must have happened. Real scientific, huh? Something must have happened. No predictions, no nothing.
Right. Yeah. Something must have happened. Iron Mac, good to see you, brother. And yes, tonight, for sure, it's going to be available. And I'm going to be doing a series of interviews on ERV, some presentations. We're going to have some fun with this and get it into the hands of as many people as possible. Matt, what are your thoughts on this argument? Because we oftentimes discuss the evidence for mitochondrial Eve, Y chromosome Noah, right? The fact that every single Y chromosome on the planet is nearly identical, extremely low genetic variation. Same with the mitochondrial DNA, right? Low variation in both of these uniparentally inherited DNA compartments. We also know that the observed rate, the pedigree rate, okay, is fast, a lot faster than the evolutionary community has ever predicted. So wait a minute. We got only a few DNA differences, okay, separating any two people in both of these DNA compartments. But yet we also have a fast mutation rate. Well, that means these DNA compartments must be young. But the evolutionists, right, they have a problem explaining why there is such low variation in the mitochondrial DNA, which on a phylogenetic tree, okay, you can take mitochondrial DNA worldwide, you can take Y chromosomal variation worldwide, and you can build these family trees that point us right back to one woman, of whom all we've descended from, one man, of whom we've all descended from, Y chromosome Noah. Okay, but Matt, they'll say, well, the reason why is because, you know, for one, you guys are looking at the pedigree rate, the empirical rate, and not the phylogenetic rate, the long-term substitution, right? So you're laughing already because you've heard this. I mean, we've got a whole entire book debunking this. So they'll say, the Dodgeball Dans of the world, they'll say, you know, over time, you've got, you know, you got drift, you've got selection. So a lot of these variants are removed over time, or they're just completely lost. Bottlenecks to consider. So that is essentially their explanation for why there's low variation and the fast mutation rate. What would be your response, brother?
Okay. As a young Earth creationist, we are the same as every other scientific group of people out there. All we have to do is be able to explain the diversity of life that we see around us. So when we look inside of humans and we say, what's the mutation rate that's happening inside of our bodies? How fast are these mutations ticking? And how fast does a new mutation arise and then go through the entire population before it reaches something called fixation, where now that mutation is in every single human being? So imagine something like blue eyes being a new mutation. Well, how long would that mutation take in the population in the world today before everybody has blue eyes? Well, with 7 or 8 billion people, it would take a really, really long time. But if we go back in time and we start from creation, it would have only been 2 people. Going back to the flood, we only have 8 people. So when we have a smaller population of people, fixation happens very quickly. Well, what did groups of people right after the flood do? Well, we were told in both scenarios, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Humans didn't really do that very much. We didn't really listen too good. We listened to the multiply part, but not really fill the earth. We stayed in one area. And when that happened, these fast mutation rates in our body rapidly reached fixation. But even then, there's only about 24 fixed substitutions in all of humans worldwide. That's not very many. We can account for this based on how fast the mutation rate is. And we can look at studies like this, which give us the answer that we're looking for, which means, can we explain the genetic diversity in humans today in a young Earth creation timescale? And the answer is yes. All of these studies using observable pedigree studies, meaning we've taken either a grandparent and a father or a father and a son, and we've tracked that back multiple generations. Some of these studies go back 11 generations. Some just take multiple people from around the world and go from their parent to the grandparent. And then we test and we add up all the new mutations and we say, how many mutations and substitution rates are there in these things? Can we explain the genetic diversity? And we can. Because the mutation rate is so fast, we can explain the vast amounts of genetic differences in all humans just a few thousand years. But evolution, they need these rates to be exponentially slower. Because remember, they made up and invented a genetic bottleneck 200,000 years ago that there's no evidence for in their own geologic column. So they need to invent a mutation rate that goes to that invented bottleneck, and they still can't do it. There's not a single pedigree mutation rate that's slow enough for them to even go back even remotely close to 200,000 years. So what does that tell you? Who's using the rescue device? Who's using the actual empirical evidence? There's a reason that they invoke selection. There's a reason that they invoke drift, because they have to. They don't have any evidence for it. That's why they ignore that CO1 gene. That's where selection doesn't take place. Well, guess what? We've made predictions on the CO1 gene. They ignore it because selection doesn't matter there, right? They want to just focus on the entire mitochondria or the control region or the hypervariable regions where selection might play a little significant factor if there's a big mutation there. But we're only talking one mutation out of 200 because remember, selection's only going to see the worst mutations, not these trivial little ones that we can get from smoking cigarettes and, little ones that are little somatic mutations here and there. Those don't get passed on through the germline. Those are somatic mutations. So I hope that made a little sense. I went on a little tirade there.
No, man, you take as long as you want. This is important. These are the lines of evidence that we focus on that absolutely crush common descent and deep time evolution and universal common ancestry. Okay. But at the same time, these lines of evidence that we focus on confirm biblical creation. And again, anyone just joining us tonight, stay tuned. The Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook will be available. And not only does it dismantle ERVs, that I'm sure anybody who follows this channel knows, that's the ERV, that's the evolutionist top argument. Okay. Their favorite argument. But it turns out after examining the data, after examining the primary source data, okay, the existence of ERV and ERV-like sequences is amazing confirmation of the design diversity hypothesis. So Matt, based on what you were saying, brother, great points. And I'm going to go back to what you were saying at the beginning of your explanation. When we have a small population of people, let's say after the flood, you got 8 people, Noah, his wife, Shem, Ham, Japheth, their wives. And we all essentially descend from those founding couples, Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their wives, right? And you have a fast mutation rate on a small population. When it comes to fixation, to anybody in the audience, that just means to get stuck in place, okay? Fixation rates would be higher, right, Matt?
Yep.
So we have a small population, faster fixation rates. So what does that mean about the low variation in, let's say, the mitochondrial DNA compartment. That pretty well on its own refutes their rescue devices that they're looking to, because it's our model that has an out of Babel dispersal, where we have the majority of people at that time congregating in one area. How many people do you think were around at the Tower of Babel?
You know, we can go upwards of, let's say, 20,000. Why not?
Right. Okay. So let's say 20,000, and then at the flood, 8. So we have a fast mutation rate. We have patriarchal drive. Matriarchal drive may apply. I think more study has to be done into that. And so rapid and exponential population growth. So just in a few generations, you have bam, 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 fixation of new mutations, right?
Yep.
And yet today, as we can see here, guys, this is a mitochondrial phylogeny. Okay, this is just to break it down so the layperson can understand. This is a reflection, a manifestation of worldwide mitochondrial DNA diversity. So the mitochondrial DNA we inherit from our mothers. The Y chromosomal DNA we inherit from our fathers. Okay, so I got my Y chromosome from my dad. I got my mitochondrial DNA from my mom. That's why we call these DNA compartments, right, Matt? The uniparentally inherited DNA compartments. They're not the biparentally DNA inherited compartments. They're the uniparentally inherited DNA compartments, which means they're less messy, and they're perfect when it comes to answering this question of ancestry. Okay, pretty well no recombinations occurring. We have the scrambling of pre-existing DNA differences every single generation. Okay, so what you can see here on this tree is random mutations in people groups over time. But we only have a few DNA differences. I think the mitochondrial Eve consensus sequence, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, on average, you have about 20 to 25 DNA differences separating any two people. And the max, which would be your larger lines on the phylogenetic tree, your African lines, you'd have between 100 and maybe 140 max. Okay, so very low variation and a fast mutation rate. And according to our model, Matt, as you're pointed out, rapid fixation events after the flood, and probably right around the Tower of Babel event before people spread out in all parts of the globe, which gets into a whole nother set of arguments pertaining to allele frequencies and geographically specific Y chromosome differences.
And it explains the Neanderthal as well, because they stayed in small populations, which means more fixations, more mutations, and therefore they look older.
Amen. Amen. So their argument that we're only focusing on the pedigree rate, we're ignoring the substitution rate, the long-term mutation rate. Apparently, we're ignoring selection, we're ignoring bottlenecks, we're ignoring the amount of differences that are lost over time. That doesn't work, does it, Matt?
No, because I made this little chart for people that you can see right here. And like, how long would it take to get to the top of a pyramid? You know, if it's just made by a few people? Well, not very long, because it's a small pyramid. That would be, you're an example of a fixation. If there's just a small population, to get to the top of a pyramid when you're walking doesn't take very long. Well, that's how long it would take for a mutation to get inside of all of these people right here. But if there's a lot of people, that's a much larger pyramid and a much harder time for a mutation to reach fixation. But our model can explain these few fixed substitutions that are in the human population, because if deep time was true, human populations all throughout time were in very small populations through multiple bottlenecks. That means there should be a lot more fixed substitutions than we actually see. We can account for this because it makes sense in our model. Evolution has no answer for why in the world there's so few, because of deep time.
Amen. Again, well said. Exactly what we would expect. Exactly what we would expect based on the biblical model of ancestry, right? I mean, with these trees, again, for the audience sake, you know, this is important. And these are the types of arguments that we focus on. For example, in the Independent Origins Handbook, you'll find this. And on our website, you'll find 2 specific books, Special Creation and Refuting the Critics, where we address the critics' best arguments, okay? So you'll notice explosive growth from a center point, right? And this is exactly what we'd expect. We were talking about from the biblical point of view. You have rapid growth from a starting point, right? From Eve, from Noah, essentially. Low variation. And the evolutionists, they want to hold to what's called the evolutionary molecular clock, right, Matt? And they want to, for the most part, assume the chimpanzee human split, assume evolution happened, right? Assume deep time, assume the geological column. That's why they're really good at what's called circular reasoning. Circular reasoning. And so they want to count up the differences between humans and chimpanzees and calculate backwards. And that's where they come up with a very slow molecular clock. But Matt, as you've pointed out, the molecular clock is fast, And the fixation rate at portions of human history were fast too during the bottlenecks, especially the flood bottleneck, to be specific. But you can look to specific haplogroups here. The HVR, most common in Europe. Notice the differing size lines, right, Matt? This means some people are picking up more mutations than their cousins in the same amount of time. That breaks the assumptions behind the evolutionary molecular clock. That means, right, Matt, you can't look then to differences between humans and chimpanzees and make the assumptions that they want to make. They can't do that. They can't do that. Okay. Universally, the clock is fast, but we actually can see different rates in the same amount of time. So, yeah, go ahead, brother. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and we know that the clock is different just looking at human beings, let alone in different animal species. You know, I like to point out and show this little chart, like which one's older. Well, evolution would say that the orangutan, then the pongo, and then the gorilla, and then the chimp, and then humans was last. And they base that on mutations. There's more mutations here, and there's less mutations, and then the least mutations. But wait a minute. They invoked a bottleneck, right? Right here. Everything came through a bottleneck. Whether or not it's the global bottleneck that we say it was from the flood, they say it was probably some type of volcano. So it really doesn't matter. So let's say that this is a volcano 200,000 years ago. Well, guess what? A bottleneck resets genetic diversity. So what are these doing with more genetic differences than all the others? Well, guess what? That's what sets those genetic boundaries up that we talk about. These have more mutations in them, not because we're related, but because these have a faster generation time, a much faster generation time. So when you look at a phylogenetic chart that shows these older than these, older than these, and older than these, it's because of the assumption that these are older. But now we know that they can't be older because of a genetic bottleneck. And the mutations that we're seeing in them are based on a generation time. Let's say that all of us right here, every single one, that we're just related. And there's 3 mutations that happen in every single generation. Well, if pongos have a generation time at the age of 4 and 5, and a human has one at 30, guess what it's going to look like? That pongo is going to look much older genetically and evolutionarily than a human, because they've had 4 times more generations in the exact same time period in the span. So that's what we're seeing when we look at the phylogenetic charts, is we're seeing their assumption of neutral theory is eradicated based on what we now know with actual bottlenecks and resetting of the DNA. So everything came out of a bottleneck. Everything's the same age. They have more genetic differences, not because they're older, but because they've had more generations, even if the mutation rate was exactly the same. So end of story.
Well, what about the dodgeball Dans of the world that say, listen, this isn't evidence for creation, because you've got species originating, 90% of species originating in the genetic boundary study. So the dodgeball Dans of the world will say what, Matt? They'll say that means you had previous archetypes that these species would have originated from. So by definition, that can't be the creation event. Is that right, Matt?
Correct. It literally proves the flood. It means that
Right.
90% of life today came out of 10% that's in that doorway right there. Well, what could that have been? What's 10%? Going back in time, all the animals that were on the ark. So that's true. They came off the boat, and that's what we have today after thousands of years. It was never a creation event.
Isn't this hilarious, Matt, that over the years now we've published what? Our library has at least over a dozen books. And we've done a ton of shows on genetic boundaries and answering Gutsick Gibbons' question. Okay, we've had we've done a ton on this. We've had videos and articles and sections within our books refuting the best arguments they can offer, and the best arguments they offer, Matt, is a straw man fallacy.
Yeah.
Is a straw man fallacy. They don't even get the basics right.
No.
We're not talking about the creation event here. We're talking about the flood bottleneck. So start again, try again. Okay, and hopefully you can do better next time.
They can go to Answers in Genesis and read their articles on that model or on that study. They can go to CMI and read it. They can go to Dr. Jensen and read what he wrote on it. They all say the same thing. It's the flood. Not any of them say it was creation.
Right. It's here. Let me. So Jerome M. A couple questions. So he asked, "Is there a?" Here, let me share my screen as well, brother. So is there a colored edition? Battle of the screen shares, eh, Matt?
Yeah, I know.
I love. Hey, listen, man. I'm a visual learner, and there's been studies done that you will comprehend. People will comprehend more when there's a visual. When you have a power, if they're seeing what we're saying, if they're seeing what they're hearing, they comprehend and retain more. And that's why we love slides. That's why we have thousands of them, right, Matt? We love visuals. So the answer is yes, Jerome, brother. I've got the black and white version in front of me here, Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. Okay, but there is a full color edition as well that should be published tonight. So to answer your second question, I have been periodically checking. It says updates are in review, which means we're just a few hours away from, right, Matt? Or if updates are in review, does that mean that if people order it tonight, they'll get like the actual finished copy, or they'll get?
It depends on where they are. There's some places that print them out like immediately when they get them, and it might be the earlier copy, because our attempt to publish the first one was met with resistance by Amazon, and now they've said, okay, we'll do it. But then we had to update it. So now we'll have that updated version, which will probably be based on how fast they're doing everything, in about 12 hours.
Okay.
For the colored one. Because
right. So for both, I would say then to everybody in the chat, wait till my notification tonight sometime, either in community posts. I'll also put the links here in the description box of this video when it's good to go, so people can order. Again, it's 170 pages. It's the most comprehensive response to ERVs that you're going to be able to find. Matt, I wanted to kind of showcase this real quick.
Yes.
From the video that you uploaded on, let me see here. So your video, Biblical Genetic Diversity Explained by Recombination, because there's even a specific young earth creationist that was conceding this point to the most militant of critics, saying, bravo, crossover rates and young earth creation, and the fact that young earth creationists cannot account for the amount of recombination that has apparently occurred in humans. When no, we have an answer. We've had an answer, and the answer comes directly from the primary source data. We touched on this earlier. So for sake of time, we won't do it again, but I do recommend people check out these videos. So One Punch Man, who's a great brother, he was asking, do Africans have a faster recombination rate? And just for the audience sake, there are a ton of great sources here that can kind of get you started, and then the book's going to have more. So Matt, you pointed out PRDM9 variants, common in Africans but rare in Europeans. And over here I posted, empirical studies have shown that African Americans have higher recombination estimates rates compared to European, because remember, the Africans have more of these sites, more fully working PRDM9 DNA elements, and lo and behold, what do they have? Higher levels of genetic diversity. They have more pieces of DNA. That's not because of age. It's because of a process. We talk about this all the time. Not time, a process. Not time, a process. This applies to geology. This applies to astronomy. This also applies to genetics. Okay, gene conversion also plays a role in what's called linkage disequilibrium. Gene conversion may play a significant role in the decay kinetics of LD which is linkage disequilibrium in human populations. Notice this. Crossover events tend to reduce population level association known as linkage disequilibrium. But right here, among alleles on either side of the crossover. And so the expected amount of LD between sites depends on what? The recombination rate. So if you have faster recombination rates, more effective recombination rates in some people, then that people group will harbor more genetic diversity. It has nothing to do with time. Notice this. We identified several genes in African Americans and 5 in European Americans that show substantive evidence for a hot spot in one population, but not the other, which raises the question of whether populations differ in their recombination landscape. Matt, what did we touch on earlier? That paper that says PRDM9 is a driver of genetic what? Landscape. Okay. These critics need to accept the answer for what it is. Okay. But a lot of them aren't actually looking for answers. So it's in one ear and out the other. Notice this. Matt, how many times have these critics said, well, you know, the PRDM9 doesn't mean that we're looking at faster recombination rates, right? Matt, what does this say? Because the recombination process varies among individuals and through evolutionary time. There's that evolution assumptions, differences in hotspot character. So listen, there's a lot of factors to consider that the evolutionary community doesn't want to consider, that the militant critics of evolution do not want to consider. So I just wanted to point that out. Matt, go ahead, brother.
Nice. No, I saw a comment that was pretty funny. BBC released latest proof of a global extinction. They said it was a flood. That's pretty funny. Yeah, a lot of people are anti-catastrophism because of Charles Lyell. So we don't investigate those types of things. You know, for good reason. It's kind of hard to investigate something that will nullify and falsify your theory, but kind of makes sense why they would ignore it. But I'm interested to see how long ago they said it was and why. I mean, we know why, but
we know why. But what's their? Because as we point out, like the genetics boundary study, right, Matt, that demonstrate all species have arisen at the exact same time. You know, a bottleneck, but of course not the biblical bottleneck, not the flood. And then the date they give, 200,000 years, is that based on observed mutation rates, the empirical method, or is that based on evolutionary and deep time assumptions?
It was on assumption. First of all, the study wasn't even for trying to determine a time. That's not what the study was even about. So that wasn't the focus. But they had to give a time, right? And so what are they going to use? Well, the accepted time is 200,000 years. So just throw it in. No one's going to question it. Nobody knows what's going on. So, but then again, look at all these pedigree rate studies. How come all the different studies keep saying humans, most recent common ancestor of all present day humans, lived just a few thousand years ago? No matter what model you look at. It's why does it keep happening? Why is this showing young earth creation timelines? Why are we able to explain the diversity using the observable rates, and they have to invoke that our observed rates are wrong and their assumption rates are correct, and we must be wrong because young earth creation can't be true? Who's in desperation mode? It should be obvious.
Well, they're on the defense. And Matt, can you cover this slide? This is a fantastic slide that you put together, just showing how powerful the biblical creation model is, guys. In the chat, I want to point out it's a great time to be a young earth creationist. And, you know, we at Standing for Truth Ministries, we do bring the heat. Okay. We bring the heat to the evolutionist side, the militant evolutionists. They're on the defense. They're challenged to make better testable predictions and put forth a more superior model. We've addressed their so-called best challenges. We've answered their toughest questions, and we've overturned their model, and we've provided a more superior one. And it's about time they step up. And it's precisely why it's a great time to be a young earth creationist. So Matt, yeah, go ahead, man. This is a fantastic visual.
I have to thank Brendan for making these visuals for us. But yeah, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a video putting evolution versus creation on a stand side by side. Who's better at making predictions? Is it evolution or is it creation? Because that's what makes a hypothesis, an actual theory. Don't tell me you've got a piece of evidence like a phone and then build the story around why the phone is there and then say that your story is better than mine when you can't prove yours. You envision why this happened, but I show you the observable proof of how this was made and you deny it. Okay, that's what we're saying. That's what we're seeing. So when we come along and we go, let's go through this real quick and say, what about genetic similarity? Well, they predicted no genetic similarity. Why? Because we know that they did. We literally know the names of the people who made these predictions based on genetic similarity. And I'm sorry to tell you, evolutionists, it was not good for you guys because you predicted no genetic similarity, and you would have been right if evolution was true. I'll tell you that. That's true because genetic differences build up because of mutations, and you can't have hundreds of millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years even and still expect there to be genetic similarity because it would have evolved away. But yet what do we see? Exactly what we would expect if the timeline is young with all animals, with all things. We have fast mutation rates. You guys said it's slow. We have few mutations in the mitochondria, yet mutation saturation should be something you guys would find. We find rapid diversification via what's known as punctuated equilibrium, and you guys need slow deep time gradualism, which we don't even see even in the fossil record. Even the fossil record now agrees with punctuated equilibrium. Kind of ironic. We say that there was a global flood bottleneck where everything was reduced either to 2 or 7, which would cause a founder effect. Evolution said no. The evolutionary genomic increase can't come from 2 inbreeding animals. They would die. Inbreeding would kill them. That's exactly the opposite of what we found, what we predicted. No big deal, right? Genetic boundaries. They said there's no limits on genetic boundaries. Everything's related. There's taxonomically restrictive orphan genes and all these other DNA elements like endogenous retroviruses, right? Well, guess what? There's no such thing as a taxonomic boundary or any of these problems in the evolutionary model. And they use taxonomy as the main piece of evidence, or at least the top 3, for the reason evolution is true. And taxonomy has a taxonomic boundary paradox, so it actually refutes them. It's just absolutely ironic that they use these things, number 1, genetic similarity, and number 2, taxonomy, and these are on our side. So sorry, guys. Then they predicted junk DNA. Remember, 99.9% worthless, has no function. In code comes out, young Earth creation proven again. All one race. Evolution, even Darwin said, now there's different races. Of course there is. There has to be. People evolved in different areas from different things. Neanderthal made Europeans. Africans evolved out of, some other species. Then we have the chromosome differences. They never expected there was a chromosome difference between humans and chimpanzees. They found it after and said, well, there must have been a chromosome fusion. So what they do, they made some random idea like, well, we'll make a prediction that there was a fusion. And then they invented what they found was a chromosome fusion event, but yet it would have to be completely different than every other chromosome fusion event on Earth because every other chromosome fusion event contains satellite DNA, which are sequences of DNA strands that are very unique, like telomeres, but they stand out. They're called satellite DNA. And those are at everywhere there's a chromosome fusion in nature, except for it's not in humans. I guess magic let that one happen, huh? Then we expect to find, sure, there's going to be some living fossils because not everything was going to die in the global flood. Something in the aquatic species are going to live through it. Why not? Of course, right? God hasn't tell Noah to take fish on the ark. So, of course, if there's going to be things in the ocean still alive, it's because it survived the flood. We find living fossils. They never predicted that. They have living fossils that supposedly are 400 million years old. Think about that. How many bottlenecks in the evolutionary model happened over 400,000 years? You're going to tell me that it survived every one of those? They can't even get a bee to survive a few degrees temperature without them going extinct, right? We're going to lose the bees. The temperature went up 2 degrees. Yet you want me to believe that they survived multiple bottlenecks? Come on. And then differently designed anatomical functions, as where they said, there's going to be vestigial, worthless, leftover remnants of organs, right? So take the appendix, for example. They said, it lost its primary function. Well, what is its primary function? Well, in chimpanzees, it's to break down plant cellulose when they eat something, right? It's so they can eat leaves. Go outside and try to eat a leaf. It's not going to work. That's why we cook those types of foods, right? So what does it do in humans? What's the secondary function in a chimpanzee? Is it a backup immune system like it is in humans? No, it's not. So what's it doing as something as important as producing killer B cells inside the cell, like the thyroid produces killer T cells on the outside of a cell? This isn't some backup secondary function that it just gradually evolved over time. This is a very important function. That's why when you remove it, that's why the first defenders of the body are the white blood cells. And then once the virus or pathogen or bacteria gets near a cell, the defender cells, which are the killer T cells, try to attack it. And if it gets past them, it's got your backup killer B cells inside the cells that can finally attack as a third layer of defense. So you just remove your appendix, you just lost your third defender of your own body. That's not some random chance thing that just evolves slowly over time. And that's not a secondary function of what that anatomical organ does in a chimpanzee or any other primate. These are individual created aspects that are very functionally different. So they can say it's just some vestigial leftover secondary function that's going on in a human being. Well, okay, you can say that all you want, but is the secondary function in a chimpanzee what it does in a human? No. Okay, end of story, falsified. And then we see rapid speciation. If we see rapid speciation today in a world that's completely full and saturated, then how much faster was speciation in a world where there weren't anything getting off of an arc? Think about it. You have multiple different niches of environments, completely empty and void of all creatures. So you have species diversifying and moving out and filling up all these gaps of cold areas, warm areas, deserts, forests, tropical rainforests, and all these different things. And rapid speciation events going on, right? You get rapid punctuated equilibrium where there's, we can go to the Galapagos Island and we can see that birds are speciating at a rate of every 3 generations. Well, that's on an island where they're already existing. Imagine when they first got there, how fast it could have been to fill up all these niches. So we can easily explain the diversity of life that we see through rapid speciation. Very, very easily. But evolution would say no. Remember, Darwin predicted that there wouldn't be a new finch species for another 3,000 years. That was his prediction on how slow speciation should be based on evolution. We find now it's 1 every 3 generations, or 3.3 years. Completely the opposite of evolutionary predictions. So every single one of those would be predictions that were made by us versus them. They got wrong, we got right. End of story, man. And this list is just this because, it could have been redundant. I could have made this 3 times bigger, but look how long it took to go through. Why, right? Why beat a dead horse to death? Why beat it? I don't get it. It's game over.
Well, we are beating that dead horse known as evolution. We are beating it over and over again. I'm starting to feel bad for it. Not really, but that right there, brother, that last 15 minutes, as Redefined Living pointed out, Matt Man breaking it down, give us a flex. And so what we should do, that right there is clip worthy. That is full scale demolition of evolutionary theory. Okay. Someone in the chat said, you're straw manning us. We don't believe we, evolved from bananas. Nobody's saying that. We understand that you believe you and a banana plant are related through common ancestry. You and a strawberry are related through common ancestry. That doesn't make it any better. Okay. It's still embarrassing. It's still not science. Okay. It's not supported by the science. It requires imagination. And as Kent likes to say, and did say in this show earlier, they should start their own private school, SpongeBob University. And, anybody who wants to pay for the science fiction belief that, whales and banana plants are related through common ancestry can attend that school privately. One thing I want to mention, Matt, and a lot of compliments on that slide, brother. So if you want, anybody wants this slide, shoot us an email or just share screen and it can be yours, and, crop it out. So the last thing I want to say before we wind down here is we're coming at 2.5 hours. Anybody who's just joining us, the first about hour and 15 minutes, we had Kent Hovind here with us, and destroyed the favorite lines of evidence the evolutionists like to offer. And then we spent another hour and a half or so just going over some of the amazing evidence for biblical creation. Because Matt, you ever notice that the evolutionists, they'll say, well, where's all the evidence for biblical creation then? Well, here you go. Okay, just roughly an hour or so worth of irrefutable information for biblical creation. Matt, You and I both know we could talk about this till the rapture. So, I mean, it's overwhelming, actually. Here's a sneak peek, because I have had comments and emails coming through asking specifically about shared ALU sequences in primates. And here's just a sneak peek, which you'll find in the ERV book here. I've got a section, about 10 pages, 10 or 11 pages specifically dealing with this argument. It's very similar to the ERV argument, but a lot of the critics, they'll say, you know, there's one or two functions maybe, and they'll say that they'll downplay the evidence so they can chalk it up to co-option. Okay. But that's just not the case. I mean, there are roll after roll after roll in these functional units of DNA. Okay, so here's just a sneak preview, a few technical papers. Remember, we're destroying evolution right from the primary source data. Isn't that right, Matt? Jumping genes have essential biological functions. The ALU DNA sequences, which are mobile within our genome. So again, these mobile DNA elements, they help to generate diversity. They generate diversity, and that diversity can be passed on. It can be inherited. Okay, that's why one of the various titles that have been given or applied to these created units of DNA function is called variation-inducing genetic elements. Regulate the activity of ribosomes, and notice this, and contribute to the cell's immunity. Why do a lot of these DNA elements resemble, you know, parasitic genetic material or viral genetic material? Why do they appear to be the result of ancient invasions of various kinds? That is because their similarities, the structure of these DNA sequences, okay, they are necessary in order for these created units of DNA function to carry out many of their jobs. Two of their jobs involving immunity, cellular immunity, antiviral protection. These complexes are also used by cells to adapt to conditions of stress, cell stress responses. This is amazing evidence the evolutionists aren't really aware of. And they play a role in the process of protein synthesis by regulating the number of active ribosomes. Notice this. These elements, okay, are functional in gene expression in the brain. ALU, mobile elements, from junk DNA to genomic gems. Sometimes you read these articles, Matt, you'll read these headlines, you'll read these technical papers, and it almost sounds like they are being written by intelligent design advocates or biblical creationists. I mean, this is something we say. ALU mobile elements from junk DNA, which the critics say, oh, these are all mostly junk, to genomic gems. No, we as a biblical creationists, we predict genomic gems, genomic treasure. Okay, so for sake of time, I won't go through all of this. Here's another one. Differences in ALU methylation. Notice this, Matt. This is fascinating. In the male and female germline suggests that ALU DNA may be involved in either the unique chromatin organization of sperm or signaling events in the early embryo. So just like these ERV sequences and ERV elements, ALU sequences also function in embryological development. So I just wanted to point that out, guys. Let me just refresh real quick the Amazon page. And we are going to wrap it up here. We've been going for 2.5 hours now. This is a ton of fun. We've had a fantastic audience. I want to thank everybody for being here. Tons of great questions, tons of great engagement and feedback. So look out, guys. Later tonight, I will make a community post, and I'll put the links in the description box here. The Endogenous Retrovirus Handbook. I will be doing a series of interviews and videos pertaining to this new book, which will be available in color and also black and white. Okay, so look out for it, and it's worth it, I promise you. It's a huge game changer. Once the links become available, click it, get yourself a copy, pass it around. This stuff is important. Now, I do want to say that later this week, the Evolution Debate Challenge continues. The big round 2, the big rematch, chapter 2, Dr. Dino and James W. They will be debating, and round 1 actually still holds the record between 500 and 600 people live for this epic event. And so I'm sure round 2 will also be a debate to remember. Wednesday, we've got Professor David McQueen. I believe this is going to be his 6th, maybe 7th formal debate. So he is our ministry and team geologist. So he's a retired geologist. Luca Medugno is he's a chemist. He's working as a teacher right now. So this is going to be a very technical debate, very sophisticated debate. Does the heat problem preclude the global flood? So this one is Wednesday. And I got to say, I'm really, really looking forward to this one. Now, anybody not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. We've got a diversity of topics. We don't only host debates on creation evolution. We host debates on the nature of God. We host debates on soteriology, morality. So we've got a big debate on soteriology. Does the Bible teach salvation by faith alone or salvation by faith plus works? This is June 9th. So June 9th, this is going to be a heroic showdown. Robert Wilkin and Robert Sungenis, guys. So that is just a snapshot of the overall, I'm laughing at crazy. I'd be good to see it. Sophisticated. Love that word, brother. And I particularly like that word because what I see a lot of the times in terms of the counter responses from the critics is a lot of unsophistication versus sophistication. So anyways, guys in the chat, thank you so much. If you're just getting here, we're going on 2.5 hours. Dr. Dino was with us for the first hour or so. It's a ton of fun. It's always a blast with Kent. So again, guys, thank you so much. Tomorrow, I believe we have off, and then we pretty well have shows for the remainder of the week with also a few debates for you too, guys. So again, look out for the endogenous retrovirus handbook. I would say within the next 3 to 5 hours, it will be available, but you will see a post and a notification so you can pick it up. So let's leave it. Let's end this the way we started with a good laugh. Laughter is the best medicine. And to all the evolutionists, creationists, everybody, critics, non-critics, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for your feedback, your questions, your objections, your criticisms. We love them. We love them all. And that's why, guys, we do these live, because we like interacting with the chat. And we like to see the engagement also that we get from the chat. So that being said, Standing for Truth is out. Standing for Truth is going to go get another coffee and some dinner. So until we meet again, guys, God bless. Standing for Truth is out.
You really think an amoeba turned into a shark and a whale and everything? There's no evidence of a single-celled creature ever producing even a two-celled creature, let alone an elephant or a whale or a human. But they put them on, draw lines on paper. Here we got the human and the snail related. Wade, simple question. Do you believe you are related to a snail? Just a yes or no.
Yeah.
Okay. So SpongeBob, or no, what's his name? Dave thinks he's a strawberry. PZ Myers thinks he's a fish. Who's the guy who thinks he's an ape? And you think you're related to a snail. Okay, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not science. Do you believe we all came from sponges, Dave? Do you believe this textbook is right?
Yes.